Good evening and welcome to another art stream with myself, Pharaoh, and my co-host for this evening, Alexander Adams. How are you doing, sir?
Diversity is our strength, comrades. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. Now, Panama may or may not turn up. The last message I had from him was a short one saying that he was heading up to the north. So who knows? He's probably been waylaid by a northerner somewhere.
Bandits.
By bandits, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, yes,
Attracted by the glint of the buttons on his waistcoat or something.
his fine pocket watch.
Yes.
He
He has one. Yes.
he was obviously going in a horse and carriage. You need to understand as well. So,
I thought he'd replaced his horses with slaves. I thought he'd gone full reactionary.
That's a dark twist. If someone wants to Photoshop Panama on some kind of slave carriage, I imagine if you were to do that, it'd be more of like some kind of sedan chair.
Oh yes,
he's kind of gracefully being moved across. But how you doing this week? Have you been up to much? Has it been busy?
I've been slaving away in the salt mines of the foundation of aesthetics. I've been getting to grips with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and all those good chaps, all those good reactionary chaps. So this is part of the salt mines that are under AA Towers or AA Lodge. I think maybe I'm digging an escape tunnel though, where he can just go underground all the way.
The question is, can you get out Foundations of Aesthetics before Foundations of Politics? That's the real the question everyone's asking. So.
I'm sure he will get his out first. I mean, I'm still writing his. He's written his, so he has to record it.
Okay.
Once he's lost his sort of his Bob Dylan croak.
Was that what caused it as well? Was it just him kind of practicing rehearsals? We don't know.
We don't know. So I'm busy writing Foundations of Aesthetics at the moment, and no ETA on that, but I'm working on it, and it will be out when it's out, and it's my top priority.
Yeah. Any book reviews coming out? You mentioned getting a few articles placed this week. So
yes, well, I've written a review of a book on the Barbican. That I'm not sure where that review is going to appear, but I also have an associated piece which is going to appear in Bournebrook magazine on Tuesday, because that's when I write. So the Tuesday piece is going to talk about the potential for a based Barbican. You see, I couldn't resist the alliterative,
Yeah, very good
appeal.
What's your thoughts on the Barbican? Are you a fan or a hater?
I'm not particularly a fan. I knew it fairly well actually, because I worked in an office next to it, so I used to walk through it every day. As a building, I don't like it. I don't particularly like the layout. I don't like the aesthetics. I think it's quite ugly, but it has housed some good performances. It's quite a useful centre. It's in a good position. They put on some decent exhibitions, so it has potential. But my article discusses. Anyway, well, read my article for more. And that's in Bournebrook magazine on this Tuesday. So this is early February.
No, it's interesting because I've spent a lot of time in the Barbican as well. Like, I think the theatre there is actually one of the best in England, just in terms of acoustics and layout, and also, like you mentioned, they have an exhibition space as well. So there's this kind of like large downstairs, kind of like large room space, and then you go upstairs, and you've almost got this kind of like weird kind of cabinet. So I don't know how to describe it, like cabinet rooms that you go by, and it gives it quite a unique space. And what's quite good about the upstairs is you can have like individual vignettes or a focus on a specific artist or period. So often I find the exhibitions there are pretty good, but I've spent many an hour just trying to find my way around the Barbican. Is literally just some kind of like limbo style nightmare of trying to navigate your way through.
It's a Ballardian dystopia, quite an unironically Ballard supposedly set his novel High Rise in one of the Barbican towers. Yeah, because they've got the residential towers. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was going to say the other major thing that makes me dislike the Barbican is the people that reside in it, because the Barbican. I mean, we're talking about it must be about £2 million for a flat these days. And they're always filled with the most smug boomers known to man. So
yes, it's a home of Globo Homo.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But like I said, I think it has a few little redeeming bits, but it's mainly I think some of the interiors are very very well done, and I sort of the kind of concert. They often do kind of concerts there as well as like a concert hall space and stuff.
The program can be pretty good. They do have a good classical music program, and cinema's pretty decent. It shows some art house stuff, and I mean that the actual spaces themselves are actually quite nice and quite effective, and the programming is often quite varied and interesting. So I think that redeems its less appealing qualities.
Yeah, there's also this kind of quite beautiful medieval church which sits opposite the main Barbican space. There's like a kind of weird pond thing in the middle.
St. Giles Cripplegate, I think it is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and they've kept this church and sort of surrounded it by kind of like these quite nasty high rises, and has a very kind of melancholy feel to it. But
apparently I've seen the photographs, and apparently it was that is practically the only building that was not bombed flat during the Blitz. Yeah, so that was one of the reasons why the Barbican was built where it was, in the way it was, is because basically they had a free hand because almost everything was completely destroyed. So they were starting from scratch. Although the building itself wasn't technically started until 1972 and wasn't completed until 1982.
No, it's interesting. So if you haven't been there before, it's definitely worth looking just from an experience perspective. But maybe not.
Yes, and the book is very good. It's called I think it's called Building Utopia, and it outlines the history of the Barbican Centre, not so much the blocks of flats, but the centre, the management, some of the controversies and some of the financing. So it sort of goes into some of the problems as well. It's not just a sort of rah puff piece.
Interesting. Yeah, well, check that out. That sounds good. But I guess to the matter at hand tonight, we will be continuing our series on the Artist at Home. I was wondering if you wanted to have any corrections from last time. You normally like to have a few errata.
Well, I do have an additional one.
Yes.
It's a bit gruesome, I'm afraid, but there was a painting of a Moor beheading someone on the steps. I think you'll probably remember from one of the Orientalist stream. I think it was the first one.
Yes.
And I read an account that Gentile Bellini, one of the early Renaissance painters, he was making a presentation to the Ottoman Sultan, and it was a painting of a beheading, and everyone praised the painting, and it was very sort of very admired, and the Sultan also praised him, but he said he got something wrong. He had when he depicted this beheading, this dead body, he had failed to show the way that the skin retracts from the cuts, from the point of severance, as it were. And to illustrate his point, he had one of his slaves beheaded in front of the artist, so he could see for himself.
I mean, that's quite a baller move, but also totally disgusting at the same time. So
yes, yeah. So that's it's a bit of a gruesome update. Sorry about that, folks.
Oh, love it. That's great.
I think it's an interesting insight into the values of other cultures.
Exactly. Okay. Well, let's.
And by the way, I want to say that all cultures are beautiful and that we make no judgments here.
We are a pro beheading culture organization.
Well,
if that's your culture. If that's your culture,
yes.
I mean,
if that's your culture, we
it.
support it. Yes,
exactly. Okay, let's start by looking at some of the houses. Should we kick off with one of yours, Alex? First, do you fancy doing?
Yes, not one of my houses, I have to add, but one of my selections.
Who do you want to go through first? What's or
what of either?
well, yeah, we could do Morris first.
Yes, Morris is sort of ahead of. Oh dear. Yes, that's not a slip you want to make. Morris is obviously William Morris, the famous the artist, designer, theorist, poet from the late 19th century. He was sort of part of or associated with the pre-Raphaelite movement, pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And he commissioned his house in. You have to help me out. I can't remember.
It'll be the 60s, I think.
It was, I think, 1860, and the house was. This is me looking up where my. Okay, here I have the document which has the details. So apologies for this. I should have got this up earlier.
Just while you find that, like Morris is a really interesting character because he starts out trying to kind of push the more literary aspects. So, like you said, he was a poet. He wrote a novel that was relatively well respected, but then nothing sort of came beyond that. And I think he got quite badly panned for some of his poetry, and that's why he moved to a more kind of artistic background. He originally was going to train as a vicar. Alongside Burne-Jones, and then they'd both read a book by John Ruskin and decided to kind of commit their life to art instead. So it's interesting that they went from kind of one religion to another kind of form of transcendence at the same time. But
the cult of aesthetics, yes.
Yes, exactly.
So I found. Yes, I have the details here. So this is the Red House. In Bexley Heath, which is south east London, I think. It's now part of southeast London. At the time, it was a village outside London, but it's now incorporated inside London. The architect he commissioned was someone called Philip Webb, and the house was built, I believe. I'm not sure. Well, I have the dates 1859 to 1865. So I think it's 1859 the house was completed, and then he sold it in, I think it was 1865 or 1866. I think it was. He didn't occupy it for very long.
Yeah.
I believe he was I believe he was supposed to share this with Edward Burne-Jones.
Yeah, well, but he ended up marrying May Morris, isn't it? Basically, he's kind of longtime muse / also one of Rossetti's muses. So it's like one of the models that Rossetti used.
Yes.
Morris's background is he came from like a very wealthy family, and so he could already afford a house like this just outright. But he also had his famous Morris & Co. Shop, which was very popular, basically. So I think it was a combination of some inheritance and his kind of design shop, which led to the creation of the house. Just a note on the actual kind of style itself. Philip Webb's an interesting guy because he doesn't really produce that many good buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you can look him up. You can decide for yourself. As that all I'll say. But the Red House is by far his most superior one, and it kind of it's looking forward to the Royal Arts and Crafts movement in the 80s. But obviously, Morris is all about. He's the original return meme. Return to traditional methods of production and vernacular styles. And he's trying to go against the kind of waves of classicism and more recently kind of Gothic, really, with this house. And it's kind of like a pseudo Elizabethan manner, really.
Vernacular style.
Yeah, because it's so early before they could, like, there was a lot of research. There was a proper like Elizabethan revival later, and they actually like checked out houses properly. But this is kind of like trying to take a few hints from the past, like the things like the use of red brick, which seems to us so pedestrian, was a huge deal at the time, because like if you're having a nice house, it'd be made out of Portland stone, or like I think like the white or yellow brick for the Gothic buildings, basically.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like,
or it would be stuccoed.
yeah, exactly. So just stylistically, it's quite revolutionary. But I guess kind of one of the reasons why that everyone likes to bring it up is the kind of interior and his kind of interior philosophy. So shall I move on to the first?
Yes, please do. And I believe also he had some inputs. So it was him and Webb who what's his face?
He designed it. Yeah, and again, I think that if you see Webb's other buildings, they're pretty average. Yeah. I just put a little floor plan in there as well. I mean, again, I think the use of the well is just so like this is the most larpy thing about the whole place. It's kind of like,
is it actually a working well?
Yeah, it worked at the time, but
okay.
it was unnecessary. Well, I don't know.
Well, obviously it was plumbed, so yes. I mean,
well,
yes.
exactly. They had the Victorian pump station at this time, so. But you can see it's kind of like an interesting building, but also just in terms of like the rooms, it's a relatively palatial compared to some of the artists we've seen so far. Very nice house.
Yes.
So this is the entranceway.
Yeah. So you've got a lot of bare wood, stained wood. You can't really see it, but you've got like a highly patterned wallpaper on the right.
Yeah. Zoom in, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is so again, like just some of the kind of ethoses that he took into his house is all about sort of rejecting technology. So all of the wallpaper is done by hand.
Yes, these are wood block prints. So you have the wooden block, and you pass over different wood blocks, and they have different colors and different color inks on them, and that's how you produce this. At the time, they could do more elaborate wallpapers by mechanical means, but this was a deliberate return to tradition. This wallpaper is now, of course, fabulously expensive because it's so intensive in terms of man hours.
Yes, it's about like
which ironically has turned this sort of artisan craft thing into something that only the middle class could afford, or the upper class even.
Yeah, well, always was with these movements, yes. Which is funny. You see the same actually with the secessionist movement. They had a the Wiener Werkstätte, which again had a similar philosophy. They all end up just being kind of like elite goods, really. But yeah, the wallpaper you can buy today for about £100 per square meter. So to cover this room, it would be about, I don't know, £600, just to give you an idea. It does depend on the number of colours you have, because each additional colour is another wood block and another level of complexity. But I think most of his designs had like at least 6 blocks or whatever. It's very intensive work. Just another note on the furniture. One of the kind of big design thoughts was the idea of painting furniture, and so Morris collaborated with artists in the PRB to produce like individual works of art directly on some of the cabinets. So I think this is a Rossetti by the door, basically, which is quite cool. So the actual artwork, the furniture itself becomes the artwork.
Yeah, I should mention also that there are two medieval precedents for this. One is that actually a lot of early prints, which were made by usually wood block on paper, they have not survived. One of the reasons was that they were customarily pasted onto furniture. And so, of course, as you can imagine, that didn't last very long. It lasted for sort of, 10, 20, 30 years. And of course, it sort of peeled off, it got grubby, and people just sort of over pasted it or took it off. So that's why we don't have a lot of early prints, because they were actually applied to furniture. And also the cassone is the wedding casket, or as it were, of a married woman. In Italy, she would be presented with a casket or a chest to hold essentially bed linen or expensive linen, and this was given to her on her wedding day. And this would traditionally be kept in the bedroom or at the foot of the bed often. And this would often have a painted panel on the front, often depicting sort of like sacred and profane love, or some sort of mythological scene or something like this, related to sort of marriage or sort of conjugal happiness and so forth. Interestingly, a lot of artists did this, including, I think it was Piero di Cosimo and maybe Botticelli, but also someone has identified a couple of cassone panels which often get sort of cut out or sort of dismantled from these chests when they're good paintings, which is why so few of them have survived. There is apparently a couple of paintings on board that were part of Cassone, and are thought to be by Leonardo da Vinci. So maybe if we do a Leonardo da Vinci stream, then we can have a look at those, and people can decide whether or not they look authentic.
and just like tying this back to kind of why Morris was interested in it, you got to understand that the 1850s and 60s, this is kind of peak Victorian industrialism. We've got the dark satanic mills of Blake have really kicked into gear, and so this is basically it's a sort of reactionary movement against modern society. And so the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, were focused on rediscovering an art style which is more medieval and more mythic than the kind of classical vein, hence kind of trying to look back to before Raphael's work. And yes, in a similar way, Morris was trying to connect to medieval, Tudor, and like older traditions that survived. So again, I have no doubt that that's where he kind of picked up on the idea of furniture painting from, through those boxes. But that's really, really interesting. Just one other thing I'd say as well is, like, just in terms of the stylings, it's a very humble house. It's wood, it's all wood, etc. So this guy is very rich, so he could have had the kind of full marble interiors, etc. So it's making a statement about it's about the craftsmanship, not necessarily about the kind of showing off, like bling-esque elements. But
yeah.
So yes, next dream.
So this is the.
I think this is upstairs.
It's upstairs, yeah.
Yeah,
under the eaves.
Because this is one of the mansard roof. I think it is like the drawing room space on the first floor. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got the sort of the elaborate sort of brickwork for the chimney and the fireplace, yeah, which I think is sort of related especially to sort of Tudor brickwork, sort of thing that Henry VIII had for his palaces.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a note on that, because again, Morris is often kind of brought in to being a medievalist, but actually maybe it's partly because such little medieval stuff really survives. He's really a Tudorist. And actually, when you see all of the kind of vernacular references, it's all from Tudor stuff, actually. So not on the design side, that is to say. So all of the furniture you could easily see in Henry VIII's court or whatever. But I think it's partly because there just wasn't that much research done on medieval living, and again, just stuff hasn't survived in a similar kind of way. But all of the furniture was created for this specific space. So again, this kind of big cabinet was commissioned and built, and you can see again the kind of hand painted panels on the background. I think this has been this is it in the 70s, I think, because you can see these kind of like quite nasty Victorian chairs which have just been upholstered in Morris fabric, but those definitely are not like his style. And that same with the rugs. I don't think that's quite right. But yeah, no, very cool space. Here's another bit of the furniture, and again you can see some more of the wallpaper in the background. And again, this is actually more like some of the chairs that his design studio was creating, using very old school techniques to lay down different parts of the chair. And it's like a rush
seat.
Yeah, exactly, which is like a type of plant that's woven together to create the seats in a very traditional but humble style. So again, compare this to what other kind of socialites in London are having there. They've got like their gilded, or what's it, ormolu? What's the?
Yeah, I don't know what the verb is for that. The adjective
yeah.
as well.
Yeah. But yeah.
And you can see the sort of the archness, because these are so finely defined, and the parts are so thin that you can tell that this is going beyond what any sort of medieval or Renaissance furniture would have looked like. It would have been much heavier than this. This is very stylized.
Yeah, that's true. Even look up the furniture of Charles I. You'll be shocked to see just how chunky it is. Basically, it's really very much like the French furniture, like Louis XII or whatever. That's when it starts to be refined. So it's a weird kind of like almost like pastiche to the past or whatever, or a reimagining. But that's sort of why it works at the same time. There you go. There's the other view with lovely Dutch tiles on the inside there.
Yeah, Delftware or something.
Yeah. Now I think this is the view above the staircase. I think I've got a different picture to show you that. Maybe there you go. There's the staircase.
Yeah.
Any comments on this at all?
No, I mean, again, it's sort of English style. So you've got sort of like you've got the exposed beams, which you would find very commonly. Sort of whitewashed walls, which sort of is a nod to English vernacular of medieval period, or actually sort of post-medieval period, because I should imagine that a lot of these medieval buildings would actually have been coloured inside, and that a lot of the whitewash is in part a sort of it's to do with obviously keeping this space bright, but also I think it's sort of nods to the post-Reformation period, when a lot of walls were whitewashed to sort of that it was just the style of that time.
Yeah, another little feature that I like is this kind of brick Gothic archway, and again, it's meant to kind of reminisce. If you go to old Tudor buildings, you'll see a mix of kind of brickwork and wonky beams and disfigured joists and stuff like that. So it's almost trying to be like an old school architectural feature.
It's important to see that it is a bit of a mishmash, and that this is a deliberate. If you go into any old building, which was sort of started in the 15th century and been updated since, you'll find these sort of features. But obviously, you've got to remember that this is built in from the start. It was designed to look as though it was an old building which had been developed and expanded over the years.
And there's something almost romantic about that. In the Romantic period, you've got people. Going back to the aesthetics and your point, you've got Burke redefining aesthetics as the combination of the sublime and the beautiful, these two kind of polar opposites. But as a follow-on from Burkean ideas was the addition of the picturesque. So this idea of like, this is a very picturesque landscape, and from that the Romantics picked up on it, and they were really into ruins. So basically people would have these follies at the end of the garden where they would recreate a medieval ruin, or like an old castle or a tower. So it was purposely built to look destroyed. And again, it's a similar idea with this kind of archway. It's you're trying to create this kind of picturesque, nostalgic feel inside your space.
Yeah, and I can actually read you a paragraph from the forthcoming Foundations of Aesthetics on this very subject. In his 1832 treatise on landscape gardening, second edition 1835, the artist William Gilpin added a third category to Burke's beautiful and sublime, the picturesque, which combines elements of the two. The beautiful and the picturesque are so intimately united, this is a quote, are so intimately united in the architectural foreground as to be almost inseparable. The picturesque embraces the leading forms, the angular projections, the abruptnesses and varieties of the outline, while the beautiful is traced in the symmetry, regularity, and finishing of parts. That's at the end of the quote. The picturesque has the grandeur of nature, but the grace imparted by man, and was embodied in the cultivated landscape. And yes, that often included ruins. Well, very well called.
And interestingly, the Romantics picked up on that. And there's I think there's Shelley's got a couple of poems about ruins. So this idea of the picturesque is then does get kind of pulled through, because the Romantics were a big inspiration to the PRB guys as well. So got a couple of other rooms here as well. This is there you go. This is what they've done a restoration of what it originally was like, with the fireplace there on the side. And you can see those are Rossetti's paintings on the back wall.
And they've restored the panelling next to the window back to its green, where it had been painted white earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I'll try to. Oh yes, this is the other kind of nook by one of the fireplace. I think nook is not the correct terminology for it. Do you know the name of this, where it's like a?
Oh, it's a chimney breast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ingle nook.
Ingle nook. There we go.
Yeah.
So you would often have in Elizabethan buildings a fireplace, and then because obviously the fire only gives out so much heat in a large hall, you would have this kind of little nook that you stay in, which sort of captures the heat. And again, this is a classic arts and crafts feature that gets picked up later, pioneered by Morris. And there's the view from the other side.
And obviously, yes, lots of carved and painted surfaces. So going back to the pre-Reformation traditions of the Renaissance, where you had sort of more gilding, you had more colours, you had more polychrome. Polychrome statues were not uncommon. They've survived very much in southern Europe, especially sort of Italy and Spain, where you see sort of polychrome statues of in churches and so forth.
Yeah.
Whereas most of those were either entirely removed or they were whitewashed in the Protestant North. So we've kind of lost some of that tradition.
You can actually see an example of that in Exeter Cathedral, where they have a group of alabaster angels, and again, people often find them quite garish, actually. Again, maybe it is the northern Puritan sentiments in most people's minds. But yeah, take a look do a bit of a googling for that to give you an idea. But they're very colourful, and again, when people hear about the kind of medieval period, they think it's this kind of dour, plague-ridden, boring time. But it's actually a place full of fun and excitement and colour and brightness, and
as well as the plagues, obviously.
Well, it was basically, I think it was basically pretty sweet, and then all of a sudden, just like everyone would occasionally just die. Basically, that's the
That's the
deal. Okay. So I think that's the end of Morris. Any comments on like his mindset and what he's taken into this into the
Well,
work.
it does seem a little bit Trumpton, doesn't it? Sort of, going back to the roots, abandoning modern life in a
I mean,
slightly arch way.
yeah, I mean, he is the original. Well, again, it, ideologically it comes from Ruskin really, but it is the original return LARP. Morris ends up as like a super socialist guy,
Yes.
crazy, like he's one of the leading founding members, which is also I find quite interesting. He splits away from Ruskin quite badly in that regard, but in my mind, I think Morris is the first kind of designer that tries to create this kind of unified work of art that the Vienna Secession would call the Gesamtkunstwerk. This kind of this holistic piece where it's not just about the building and then you just populate it with stuff. It's I'm going to create furniture and items for the space that it's going into. So it's got this complete completion to it.
Wallpaper, everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Tiles.
And like pieces of furniture for that specific location as well. I think we live in a world that's so off the peg. You can just pop down to IKEA and buy the same piece of furniture that someone halfway around the world can have. But even just the idea of commissioning something from a carpenter to create something for your house and space is such a radical notion today. I think, but I think it's a testament. Like, I get the impression Morris is quite OCD because he thinks about every single detail in this space, doesn't he? Really? So
Well, it has often been said that the architects are the ultimate dictators because they are that you go into these spaces, especially sort of. I think there was one of the secession guys. I'm sure it will come up in one of our future streams where he said, he built the building and he had the furniture designed and he oversaw the paintings and he designed the cutlery and the crockery, and he designed their their clothing. So essentially,
Hoffman, maybe, yeah.
Hoffman, yes, I think it was Hoffman, yes. So basically, if you had enough money, you ended up being basically the custodian of your own museum. You couldn't, and you were absolutely locked into this situation where you were basically imprisoned in this architect's style.
That's a really interesting thought. He's trapped. I mean, obviously Morris sold the house relatively quickly,
yes.
and moved on. So he sort of created this space and then and then got out of there relatively quickly, which I find quite interesting. And then ended up in quite a conventional, like Kelmscott Manor, which is just like an old mansion basically. So I think I wonder if designers like to create these little worlds and then just sort of leave them for other people instead. So,
yes.
Okay, let's move on to someone totally different. I thought a good contrast could be the John Soane's house. Are you familiar with Soane at all?
Yes. So this is the house just off Holborn, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Near Chancery.
Yes, on Lincoln's Inn Field. John Soane is a relatively famous architect. He was a sir, so he was kind of adopted into the establishment, and he's kind of like Regency, early Victorian period, but he built in a neoclassical style. But his house is really interesting because, unsurprisingly, as a neoclassicist, he is really interested in those kind of styles, and his house kind of reflects that. Now, just to kind of give you an idea of this, this is the external facade. Now, if you've ever been to Lincoln's Inn, it's like a classic Georgian square, which is a row of terraced houses. These kind of beautiful Georgian, 3 stories high plus servants' quarters below, positioned around a square of green space.
Yeah, and this is adjoining Lincoln's Inn, which is actually an inn of court. So this is where lots of lawyers and barristers work.
Yeah, often they'll kind of convert these houses into like legal offices nowadays as well.
Yes,
So,
that's right. Yeah,
very cursed. Basically, Soane sort of reskinned his building, so it originally was one of these Georgian lovely Georgian houses, and then created this kind of neoclassical pomp on top, which I sort of like. I like he was like the Georgian level of classicism isn't enough. I need to make it bigger. Literally with statues on the outside here, on the kind of like pseudo parapet, at the top, basically, this kind of ridiculous. And this is going to give you an idea of the levels of opulence and pomp. So this is kind of like,
and the two statues as well.
yeah, exactly. I mean, this is straight out of a neoclassical mansion, but in the setting of basically central London in his personal home. Now you've got to think this is kind of 20, I think it's like 30 years before Morris. So we can kind of contrast the again the almost puritanical kind of cleanliness and simplicity with some of this space. Just the layout of the place is absolutely bonkers as well. You've got this kind of library and dining room. I swear Sohn invented the open plan. He's got the first open plan space. You've got what's described as the yard, which is this kind of weird staircase down, and then a series of rooms, including the dome space, which I love, and then also he's got the Hogarth room, which is where he kept his Hogarths. And again, that's pretty baller to just say, here's my room where I just keep my Hogarth paintings. So I'll refer back to this. You can you can visit the Red House, by the way. That's a National Trust property. Please check it out if you haven't seen it. You can also visit Sohn's house. You go through the hall into the dining room, and this is the library. So this is more kind of like the kind of standard kind of Regency, early Victorian interior. You've got these kind of like large, luxurious custom shelving spaces that's been created, leather furniture, lovely marble fireplace here, and then obviously all of the paraphernalia that Sohn's picked up on his travels. So obviously I'm sure everyone's familiar with the term the weeaboo for a Japanese loving Westerner. We need that we need a name for that for kind of classical Greek art, because Sohn collected a lot of stuff. So you can see the various pots, a libation dish there, and some friezes. But it just kind of shows you the richness of materials and the opulence compared to Morris. Now, if you turn around, unfortunately, there was some kind of weird. This is actually just absolutely debased here by these terrible art installations.
We got another one of those publicity photographs of some sort of clueless tourist standing in a cultural space.
I'll never forget that guy from the last stream. I sort of want to contact him. I want to bring him on.
Oh, bless! He was. Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah.
Look at this! This monstrosity in this beautiful space. But you can see again these kind of beautiful chairs on the outside, all matching. It's all about detail and over the top. Can you see behind there's this kind of luxurious silk damask in the bottom part of the library area as well. And then if you turn outwards, you can see into the dining room space.
And again, that's the sort of internal courtyard. That's the covered sort of courtyard in the inside. Oh, atrium, really.
Yes, yeah, across
through the window.
Yeah, through the window. But again, it's an interesting stylistic choice, because you've got kind of almost kind of baroque. I mean, just the sheer pomposity to have like a baroque ceiling fresco in your dining space. It's simultaneously just so outrageous, but quite cool at the same time.
Yeah, I should point out that probably is not a fresco. Those are probably panels. But
sorry,
for anyone's being super picky.
Yes. Is there a name for that where you would have it? Because it's like canvases which are inserted into the ceiling.
There was maraflé is where you have the painting on canvas and then it's glued. It is literally pasted onto a surface. That is most probably what those are. There's a possibility that they're actually wooden panels. I should imagine they're not. I should imagine they are quite possibly canvases, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's right, because it's sort of recessed in.
Yeah.
You've obviously got this kind of like beautiful dining table, more finds, and again you can see some kind of oriental vases. That's another classic thing from the kind of late Georgian period, was the kind of obsession with chinoiserie and matters from the Orient. Can you see the cursed object in this room that does not belong?
I can see it on. Oh right, yes, yes, it's a perspex
like
perspex chair.
like a lame quasi. It's like not even a Stark chair. It's like the copy of the Stark chair, basically the ghost chair. But yeah, this is the dining room.
Yeah.
More stuff. Now this is the kind of I think this is the kind of space looking down, and this is basically where he kept all of his plaster casts. So again, as a serious neoclassical artist, he liked architect. He liked to take plaster casts whenever he was in Italy, and then take them home with him. So he had his own. This is what a reference library really looks like, basically. And
yeah.
but what I like about Sohn is that like a normal person would just like have a studio and put it in a studio, but he displays it all in his house. So it's kind of like his work has become it's kind of gone beyond reference into its own kind of form of ornament at the same time, like this meta ornaments going on in the
I wonder if he was influenced by Piranesi, because Piranesi had a habit in his etchings of antiquity. He would get these sort of friezes and these details, and he'd just accumulate them, and he'd stuff them onto onto an etching plate, and he would just fill it full of just random objects that had been dug up in Rome during the 17th century. And this looks exactly like that, just an accumulation of wonders or antiquity knickknacks, as it were.
Yeah, and again, you can tell a little bit about the man, because I think part of this is obviously it's about kind of opulence. It's about showing how cultured you are, but also it's about showing off to your guests. You know, you've taken them to the dining room and that kind of impressive view, and it's kind of like, oh, let's check out my plasters, my plaster casts of wonderful things. You know, if this doesn't, if you take a woman into this room and she's not impressed, you know, she needs to immediately dump her, basically.
Ultimate cultural swoon, yeah, and it's his bust at the centre, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean,
why not?
I didn't know about that. I guess people have portraits of themselves. Yeah. You're right, but I'm just like, should one have a a bust of oneself? Because the
Trump would do it.
Trump would do it. Exactly. Maybe that's it. You're officially reached Chad status when you have a bust of yourself in your house. If you commission a bust.
Absolutely. Berlusconi would do it. That's true. He would do it.
Yeah. This is kind of like downstairs. So this is kind of underfloor area where there's even more stuff, including kind of, I think this is like a large funerary vase that he picked up / like acquired, quote unquote. I'm surprised that Sohn hasn't been hit with the usual gang. I think this is the breakfast
the restitution
room.
Squad.
Yes, this is the breakfast room across here. And I quite like this. This is like a more private, intimate area. You've still got things like these kind of bookshelves with lots of books to kind of show that like how cultured you are. But this is like a smaller space with a nice kind of fireplace.
That's the size of my entire flat. But with fewer books, though. Obviously, I've got more books than that.
Oh, that's good. You need to have the.
Unfortunately, I don't have a bookshelf. It's just they're all in boxes and they're piled sort of 4 foot high.
Oh, that is actually atrocious. That's actually outrageous. Please, if anyone's listening now, please donate £5 to Alexander Adams so he can actually buy a bookshelf for himself and not have to live out boxes like some kind of reference tramp. This is outrageous. And then this is, I couldn't actually find a picture of the Hogarth room, but it looks a little bit like this, if you've ever been, where he's got all of his paintings on these kind of walls slat things, and you sort of sit in the middle and you kind of siphon between them. And he's got a full. I think he had the full version of the Rake's Progress,
Yes.
the original paintings,
Yeah.
which they've now replaced with just the etchings. I think all the originals have been taken away. But
Yeah.
but it's a really novel space, because again we kind of we explore paintings in the context of a larger room, but you've obviously got this very intense space that you can kind of flick through loads and loads of different bits very quickly, and also it's quite a small area, so it's very intimate. Unsurprisingly, as an architect, he has tons of two scale models. So I think that's the Parthenon at the top there, and then some of his works below, various Doric columns for scale. And then this is quite fun. I think this is either the new picture room. I'm not 100% sure, but he's literally got a kind of like a full dome slash. Is
Cupola.
Is the name of it? I was thinking, because it was sort of reminiscent of the Pantheon's.
Yeah.
Oculus, is it Oculus they call it?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, but this has got a dome, so it's
Yeah.
like unlike
So the cupola is above it. Yeah.
yeah. But again, everything is kind of like harking back to Rome, but it's still kind of been sieved through the context of a Regency architect at the same time. There we go. That's Soane. Should we flip across to Watts, and do you want to take us through the Watts gallery?
So this is. Let's just get the. So this is G.F. Watts. G.F. Watts, British painter, symbolist painter. Well, he's considered a symbolist. 1817 to 1904. The Watts village is basically, it's a complex of buildings near Guildford in Surrey, which is one of the home counties, not far from London, for anyone who isn't familiar with the geography of Britain. This was built in 1903 to 1904, so this was just as he was about to pop his clogs. What you often find is a lot of these buildings that are built by artists. You remember the Leighton one. The Leighton one was still being expanded and finished just as he was about to die, because obviously they tend to come into their money right at the end. So what happens is that stuff gets built just as they're on their way out. So this was built from 1903 to 1904, and it was expanded in 1907, and it was built for him and his wife.
Just before we start, do you know much more about the kind of artist village element to it? Because that's how I've heard it described.
That's how it's described now. I think that was the intention, that it was built, that it would become that after his death, that it would be that it was basically for his use at the time, and then it would be sort of inherited, and it would become a home for artists.
Because it's interesting for me, certainly between like the 1890s and up to the 1920s, there is this fad of creating so-called artist villages or artist spaces. The one I'm thinking of is in Darmstadt. If you've ever been to that, there's a Junger Stil artist colony where a couple of artists from the Austrian Secession, and then some German. It's in Germany, and some German Jugendstil artists created this space. But it's just interesting how like everyone was like, yeah, we need to create these little pockets and spaces for artists to be in. But do you know much about it at all?
Well, what I know is that there is a whole bunch of artists, so-called artist colonies. So these would often sort of pop up in sort of picturesque places, usually sort of fishing villages where you could get sort of cheap property, and sort of quite sort of rustic in character. close to the sea, good light. So you get these in sort of all over Northern Europe. You've got them in Denmark. I think Hammershøi, you used to go to one. You've got one that I visited, Arendorp, up in the Baltic on the German coast, which I visited. Whole bunch of other ones. Obviously, St. Ives is the one that people would know from Britain.
Yes, but
Yeah.
But like in terms of the time period though, is that like a relatively modern thing, do you know, or is it something that's always happened, do you
Yes,
think?
it's essentially something that occurs in the late Victorian period, because before then you've got people who are artists who are essentially tied to large spaces. They have to be close to their commissions. They're also painting a lot to commission, whereas in the later period, later 19th century, you have more people working for their own satisfaction and producing work and then taking it to the salons and taking it to commercial dealers. The Impressionists, of course, are the big ones. The Barbizon painters would go out and paint in the landscape. So this was quite a revolutionary thing. This was in the 1850s, before the Impressionists. So they got there ahead of the Impressionists. And then they would bring their paintings to Paris, and they'd be housed in galleries, or they'd be shown at the salon. So they would be painting on spec, as it were, and bringing their works to the cities. So at that point, you have artists starting to diffuse, and of course they're using the rail network especially, which allows them to get to the coast quite easily, and so they can commute. They can have a holiday home there. And this is when this all takes off. It's sort of after the advent of the railways and after the big boom in the salons at the end of the 19th century.
It's interesting. I wonder if it's a combination of like you said, that technology side, this decentralization, sizing power of trains, etc. That shift for commissions, but also the idea of movements as well, where there's in the 19th century more people trying to kind of coalesce together with specific ideas in a much more formal style, while before that period people would just do things and it would happen. It would be more more of an emergent thing.
Yeah. So what you get is Van Gogh went to Auvers-sur-Oise. So people will know that that's where he died. He only spent the last sort of three or 4 months there. And that was he was in the care of Dr. Gachet. Dr. Gachet was an amateur artist, and he was a friend of Pissarro, and he'd worked with other artists. And so you'd get these certain villages, especially close to capitals, close to Paris or close to London, where people could go off and they could take out, they could hire a house, and they could go and paint out in the landscape. They could paint the peasants and so forth. And it was essentially sort of LARPing as a rural painter, when in fact actually you're just half an hour from the city.
Interesting, yeah. Do we know why Watts was trying to create the village, or is it just kind of like to kind
of I don't know.
No. I sorry, I didn't know either. It's just interesting that, because it's almost like quite an ambitious vision, isn't it? You've come to the end of your artistic career, and you want to try and create this village to kind of pass on the ideas. But should we switch to some of the interiors? We've been talking too much.
Yeah, so this is the grand gallery. So this is sort of subdivided, and I think this was originally the studio. This was where he was working, and I think works very well as a gallery space. Obviously, top lit, which is what you want in a studio and a gallery, because of course top lit. What you do is you tend to get quite relatively even light. You don't get direct light, and also you don't have the bother of having windows in a wall, which obviously you can't hang next to, because you get the contre-jour effect, which is where you place a picture against a window. Your eye tends to sort of stop down as like a camera. So that's why you take a photograph of someone standing next to a window, and the person always comes out sort of really, really dark, and the window comes out really bright. So you don't want to hang anything next to a window. So your best solution is to have overhead lighting, natural if possible. So this is ideal for studios and galleries.
And what's striking to me is that the space is absolutely huge. There's a series of large galleries, and it's done to create. I do wonder whether he was trying to create these kind of communal spaces for multiple people to work in. And I know his wife, for example, was working with a team of people. But
yeah, she was. I think she was a ceramicist. Yeah. So this is a view from the other side of that sort of gallery. Yeah. So the painting there you can see in the middle is of the Minotaur holding the little bird. What is it called? Hope or something like that? Or yeah. So that's quite a famous painting. I'm not sure if that's the original or if he just repainted it for the gallery.
Yeah. We covered this in our Symbola stream as well. So please,
yes, that's right.
Check that out in the archive. Deep in the archive.
There is also. Yes, there is also a painting of the woman with the lyre. If you go back to the previous image, what you'll see in the corner is next to the sculpture is the woman with the lyre with only the single string remaining. President Obama's favourite painting, apparently. There you go, I've cursed it for you.
Oh, why have you? That has actually ruined my day.
It's true. Yep. So this is the studio when it was still a working studio. This is obviously right. I think this is just after he died because obviously the building was built in 1903, 1904, and he died in 1904. So
yeah. I managed to get a picture of this and then contrast it to the actual one as they've got it today. But I mean, any comments on the kind of the living artist studio?
It's quite interesting because the artist studio becomes so. For example, there's a painter called Hans Makart, who was an Austrian sort of history painter, as it were, sort of saloniste painter in the late 19th century. And he was around just when Gustav Klimt was emerging. And Makart had this fantastically huge studio, and it was luxuriously appointed. So you had lots of hangings, you had lots of brocades, you had fancy furniture, you had lots of upholstery, you have sort of silk upholstery, you had giant palms in sort of ceramic urns and so forth. And it was fantastically luxurious. And this was the sort of place where people would be invited. And it was actually like a social hub. So you would be invited for an audience with the artist, and it would be like a sort of like a social occasion. And, all the great and good from society would go there. And so these were actually public spaces. And also you've got to remember that in the 19th century, you had sort of at-home days. So this was where you set aside sort of 2 or 3 hours in your week. And every week you would offer invitations, and people would come to your home. So the great and the good, some of your relatives, some people you had business dealings with, they would come to your home, and you would be at home, and you would receive them in your most formal room. You'd be well dressed up. There'd be things to eat, things to drink. And so obviously the artist studio also takes on something of this character during the late 19th century.
It's interesting because, again, that the kind of the place of the artist in the 19th century reaches new heights, doesn't it? Where they're kind of almost reaching this kind of reverential hero status, and then people becoming living legends in their lifetime. Like I'm trying to think, like, not even in Vasari's lives does like someone like Michelangelo, like, do people come to him on a regular basis? I don't know. Maybe it's not. It's just not omitted. But
yes, it's certainly he was sought after and he was greatly admired. But you didn't really have social contact with him in the way that you might with a Victorian painter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think and it's not just about social contact through the art sphere. It's also society as a whole. So. It's almost a form of entertainment. I think it's that's also where the kind of the calling card comes from, doesn't it? So if you were to call on someone when they're not there, you'd leave your calling card so they can get in contact with you, which is I think a much more elegant way of speaking to people than leaving a voicemail. But
apparently there was something that you would do, is that you would present your calling card, and what you would do is, if the person was not in at the time, you would fold over a corner of that card, and that would indicate that you had not actually met the person. So it was sort of like it's a way of showing that you had done your duty, and you had attempted to contact them, but they had not been available for whatever reason.
Interesting. That's cool. I mean, in terms of the space here, I think like do you think Watts be working on all of these paintings at the same time? Was it kind of partly for reference? I mean, you often hear about artists languishing with certain paintings that just don't get finished for years. But
I think it would be a variety. So some would be worked on, some you'd be pausing, because obviously you've got drying times as well. So sometimes you'd have to leave something, and if you sort of partially varnished it, or you needed to allow part of it to dry, you couldn't work on it at the same time. You couldn't work on it on consecutive days. So you'd have a number of paintings that were going on. Some of them maybe you were working on a portrait, and the subject could only come on like once a week or something. So you obviously that took longer. Some of these would have been presented for the purposes of buyers. So this would be presentation for buyers, or or maybe you'd have like a sort of a famous writer coming around, and you'd want to show some of your better works, or some of your better known works. So they'd be laid out for a variety of reasons.
So yeah, let's switch to the live room, and you can see like this is certainly not a luxurious space. This is kind of relatively tasteful, I think, kind of post arts and crafts. I mean, the building is kind of like English modern, you would say, but it's got the strong gables, so it's definitely kind of arts and craftsy. But again, you can just the height of this room is very intense. It's very high, and then also you can notice the fireplace with some of those ceramics that you mentioned by his wife, which is quite nice. This is the other side, and I think this was the painting that he was working on when he died, which wasn't finished, and it's absolutely mahoosive. You can see this today, but yeah, this kind of shows why he's gone for the kind of high roofed space to work on these gigantic canvases.
Yeah, so having a high roof would also be important, because if you were being commissioned to paint a large painting for a public building, for example, you would need that space, and you need to be able to move the painting around also. William de Kooning, the abstract expressionist painter, I think he had a hole cut in his floor. I think also this is something that Salvador Dali had in his studio. You have a hole cut in the floor, so you can actually lower the painting down, so you can paint the top of a painting that's 6 foot tall, 9 foot tall, just while you're standing, so you don't have to get on a scaffold or anything nonsensical like that. So you could actually lower the painting down into the floor and then up, and so forth.
Interesting. Okay, I think we've got a few other photos. I don't know if you've ever been before, but this is the where he keeps his plasters, plaster casts. So he had like I think it was originally the horse stables, but then he converted it into his kind of like sculpting gallery, because he like Watts isn't known for a sculpture, but he did work on this large piece that never got finished again. This kind of rider, and this is it's monumental in size. And then inside all of these cabinets are various kind of plaster bits and bobs to help with drawing stuff.
It's interesting. You can see that he's working. If you look at the musculature of the horse, it's actually écorché. It's flayed, French for flayed. So what he was doing, he was building up the muscle groups as he understood them from books of anatomy, for example, and then he would be slowly covering it over to make it appear more realistic, to present the effect of subcutaneous fat and the skin and the hair as well.
Interesting. So moving away from the main Watts space, I've got an external picture of the further ones, but this is the nearby chapel, or the cemetery chapel that his wife created. That's worth just chatting about as well. Do you know much about his wife at all?
Well, all I know is that she was a ceramicist, and she outlived him by a considerable period. I don't know much beyond that. I know that there's recently been efforts to make her more prominent, because, of course, looking at the politics of today, of course, every woman is overlooked. Every woman has been a victim of the patriarchy. So whether or not that's the case, I can't say.
Yeah. No, she is quite an interesting character, and I think she's part of the Celtic revival movement. So what you tend to happen, there's a few interesting revival movements that happens at the late 19th century in England. You've got like a Renaissance revival, you've got a Byzantine Benedictine revival and a Celtic revival, where they're trying to reconnect with specifically Irish pieces of work, but it's kind of like a fusion of Art Nouveau with like Celtic
Yeah,
symbology and
I
stuff.
think
So
one of the problems was that there's not very much fine art, pure fine art in terms of Celtic art, especially in Ireland. It's all applied art. So you've got to sort of theoretically extrapolate what fine art, Celtic fine art, might happen to look like, should it have ever existed, which it didn't, which is something that kind of hampered the Irish nationalism. Was always it was hamstrung because it wasn't quite sure if it was supposed to go for sort of Celtic revival or whether it was supposed to go for like sort of establishing some sort of classical precedent. So sort of, you know, going for like sort of a classical orders in its architecture and stuff, and trying to sort of build up a sort of a noble European tradition, or to go for the sort of the more sort of lesser esteemed sort of Celtic revival route, and they were never quite sure which way to go.
all I'll say is that the Irish have got some great bells. You need to check out some classic medieval bells. That's peak Celtic Celtic art. Just note on some of the exterior work. So obviously, as a ceramicist, you would have worked on the various kind of panels. In the late 19th century, there is the kind of the rise of molded terracotta as the kind of the go-to way of creating tiles. So you can see here that you've got these kind of repeated patterns. You would do the original cast in plaster, then create a like a mold, and then like mass manufacture terracotta tiles. So it gave you that kind of balance of being able to create highly detailed sculptural works at scale, but it did lose some of the craftsmanship because historically detailings would be carved directly out of the brick themselves.
Yeah,
So
because this is a sort of an Italian technique. This is a Mediterranean technique. Of course, it's got nothing to do with Celtic practice at all,
yeah,
as far as the technique goes. Yeah,
it's just for convenience because
yeah.
like it's, I mean, creating one and then mass producing it versus hand carving all of them substantially different. So I managed to find a picture of her and her girls plus this guy. I'm ruining her feminist credentials, and this is the modern interior of the
Strong,
chapel.
independent woman. You see,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
that's what she was. Come on.
Yeah, but it's all done in gesso, I think, isn't it? It's like plaster which has had straw and string to give it like 3D, not
Well,
there's not
so
gesso, it's
for
not
relief, yeah, bar relief, and also it stops it adds tension because plaster is extremely fragile. But if you reinforce it in the same way that you reinforce concrete with steel, what it does is it restricts the amount of cracking and expansion and contraction that goes on.
there you go. There's a proper name for it. It's not gesso. I can't remember. But anyway, there you go. That's the kind of 360 internal, and again, you can visit that as part of your trip down to the Watts Gallery as well, which is another museum and well worth the trip. It's quite far out of town, so you'll probably need a car. But have you ever been at all?
No, a friend invited to take me over there, but we never organised an appointment as such, which I regret. I should have gone then.
There you go. Need to follow up. Okay, let's go for something totally different. And what I've tried to do is I've put in a few cursed people as well. And I thought, who is the king of the king of cursed? It's of course Corbusier.
Oh yes.
So obviously the potentially one of the most evil
Not
men
Corbusier
alive.
to you, Mister.
No, sorry, no, Corbs. I'm gonna
Corby and his
Corby
trouser
boy.
press.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, how would you describe Corbusier?
Oh well,
in a sentence.
intellectual theorist, architect, sometime painter, actually quite a dedicated painter, who was one of the founding giants of modernism, worked principally in France in the first half of the 20th century, sort of basically from the 1920s through to the 1950s.
And I guess I would see him as one of the two key minds in shaping the kind of modernist hellhole that we live in today. Between him and was it Walter Gropius as well from the Bauhaus, both intellectually and architecturally paving the way. I think Corbusier goes on a slight redemption arc towards the end of his career, a little bit with some of his work, but
the damage. You think of the what's the monastery, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, there's a few nice buildings I think he does, but it's too late. You've ruined everything. But what I thought I'd just do is take you through his apartment, and again, this is another museum that you can visit if you go to Paris. It's near the Bois de Boulogne, I think. You know, the kind of big park.
Sort of forest. It was a forest, yeah.
Yeah, in the kind of west. And it's part of this kind of horrific set of apartments. I mean, Paris is already much more apartment living style, I would say, just like...
Well, housemen's houses were essentially apartment buildings,
exactly,
albeit sort of 4 or 5 stories high.
Exactly. I think the English or the British mentality is always more home driven, while the continental is more apartment. But you know, I often mock many modern architects for selling other people horrific boxes and then living in quite nice houses themselves. But to be fair, that's credit where credit's due with Corbusier. He also lived in a bugman prison cell as well, so you know, he lived the life he wanted for everyone else.
He came up with the idea of a machine. The house is a machine for living.
Yeah, this is his machine. It's literally like a death machine. Right. Okay. Here's the. I mean, it's a tiny place. It's very, very small. Maybe about 80 square meters. This is kind of the kind of front room. It's all about obviously simplicity. Everything's stripped back. There's
open plan.
Yes, everything's very open plan at the same time. Obviously, taking some advice from Sohn there. You've got kind of like classic bits of iconic furniture, and it's all about the kind of use of color, the kind of zoning of space, and then the kind of
absence of decoration.
Yes, I guess the kind of
and detailing.
The design works are the decoration. Again, it's kind of like it's all about the chair or having the piece of furniture, etc.
With functionality being to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly, this is what Corbusier wants for everyone: a bidet, literally,
in your bedroom.
Exactly. This is the bedroom. You know, this is what he wanted for everyone. Look at this horrific. I mean, I'll just fall off that.
Me too. I mean, I wouldn't feel safe on that.
Yeah. I mean, here's a nicer space. We're obviously getting kind of lots of light in, and I think this is
no privacy though.
Well, that's true. Yeah, we saw him kind of having all of his artworks there, and you know, that's quite a nice little studio space. Oh, the doors are quite funny. They're all these kind of like fancy swing ones. So I don't know if you can see here. There's the actual space, and then it pivots around this point here, so you can swing around. And again, just to get canvases.
Right. So it's got a sort of pivot in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There's another viewpoint, and you've got this kind of old, kind of almost rustic wall to remind you of the past. There you go. But
to remind you of where you're not living.
Yeah, exactly. This is the absolutely tiny bathroom, where again everything is very, very small.
It's very Spartan as well.
Yeah, that's it. And this is the front room from another side, basically. So again, it's all about individual bits of furniture. There we go, and this is the spare bedroom here. So just living in a big coffin. There you go, big wooden,
under the railway arches.
Yeah. So there you go. That is Corbusier's.
That's plywood. That's plywood paneling, isn't it?
Yeah,
it looks like it. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the context of this is coming out. One of the consequences of the Vienna Succession was basically ideas of, the first real thoughts about modernism came about from it, specifically via Adolf Loos's work, Ornament and Crime. Have you ever read that before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, years ago.
And basically, he just kind of goes on a big rant about saying ornament is literally, it's the same as like theft or basic.
Yes, it's deception, it's dishonesty. It's sort of like and that's the whole idea of like hypocrisy in Viennese society, and that people were espousing morals, but they weren't living up to them. And so the architects and the artists said, "Oh well, we're going to do better. We're going to sort of embody our values rather than just sort of trumpeting them."
Yeah. So you've got, on the one hand, this idea where literally any kind of ornamentation is seen as a sin, as a cardinal sin, and then again Corbusier's idea of the house as a machine, and again I think it is really interesting, because you ask yourself the question, what's the purpose of a house? And Corbusier's answer is, it's something utilitarian, it's something purely physical, while any sensible traditionalist would say, yes, there's this kind of utilitarian nature to it, but the aesthetics are important because they offer a transcendent path as well. We're not just living in this materialistic world. The art and ornament has a power to go beyond the material. So it's interesting, just like, again, how like depressing this kind of space is in my mind, and
this is also related to the idea of truth to materials. So I mean, like if you're opposed to ornamentation, of course you believe that all materials should be exposed. So this is why you get those shaped plywood panels. They're not painted, they're not ornamented. You have the bare brick and so forth, and that's also where you get brutalism coming from concret brut means unadorned or raw concrete. So this was the idea that came up in the 1940s, that you would have bare concrete, and that is obviously the root of brutalism. So it doesn't actually mean it is brutal. It actually comes from the French meaning raw concrete, but obviously it has certain aggressive connotations.
And just again, the context of that is that if you look at skyscrapers coming up, being built in the late 19th century, they would often have these steel and concrete interiors, and then a fancy external cladding, which was heavily ornamented. So again, check out Louis Sullivan, and you'll see these kind of like heavily ornamented skyscrapers, but at their heart they were all supported by concrete and steel. And so, in a world where you don't have ornaments anymore, why bother having this external facade? Let's just go straight back to the steel and the concrete, which supports the structure. That is the honest core of it.
Yeah, so that's the end of the Belle Epoque period, and this is obviously a break, though. This is Le Corbusier embodying modernism.
Yeah. I was going to do a nice kind of dovetail as to maybe onto kind of Mondrian's. I mean, it's a little bit beforehand, isn't it? So
yeah, so this is Mondrian. Mondrian, obviously, famous Dutch modernist painter, part of De Stijl group. Actually, he's sort of like people were following him. So Mondrian lived in Amsterdam. He also mainly lived in Paris. He's best known for his works made in Paris, made after the First World War. First World War, he was stuck in Holland, which was neutral in the First World War and was not occupied. So in the 1920s, he moved to Paris. So you have him making his geometric paintings, So you have lines, squares, bold color, simple colors, famously averse to the color green. You will never find a green in a mature Mondrian abstract. Because it's not that he didn't like nature, but obviously you look at his room here, for example, there's nothing natural at all. There are no curves. Everything is straight edges. So all the furniture straight edges, floor, single color. This is a reconstruction. I'm not sure if this is a colorized photograph or a reconstruction. There have been lots of reconstructions. I actually came to know Mondrian's studios because there was a display in Tate Liverpool in, I think it was 2013, which I went to, which reconstructed some of his studios. And melancholy feelings because it was the last exhibition that my father went to before he died.
Oh. Yeah. Maybe for a bit of context around, because I've also you call it Distill. I've heard it called Distyle. Dutchies in chats can verify how to pronunciate it. I mean, it literally means the style.
How to pronunciate it?
How to pronounce it?
How to pronounce it?
This is why you're here, is to bring me up on my grammar and poor pronunciation thing.
Pronounce. Oh god. Okay, I give up. No. I make as many mistakes as you do.
But again, for context, this group is kind of reacting to the kind of the Belle Epoque era, this kind of richness, opulence, over the topness, some would say, and so it's all about stripping things back. They had this kind of very restricted color palette, which is it tied into the Bauhaus's like color theory as well? Do you know, or is that just it? Just happens to be
Bauhaus started in 1919. It's technically 1918, but yeah. So this was happening in parallel. So they were swapping ideas. I don't believe any of the Distill or Distyle painters actually worked in the Bauhaus or taught in the Bauhaus, but these were parallel. What you would see is these ideas would be reproduced in journals that would go to Germany. Also, remember that Holland had strong connections with Germany, especially during the First World War, where the principal exposure to modernism came through publications which went over the Dutch and German borders, because of course they were isolated. They were disconnected from Paris. They were disconnected from Britain and so forth. So there's a lot of crossover between Dutch and German art during both World Wars, but particularly in the First World War.
Interesting. So maybe it's the other way around though, because the Bauhaus has this obsession with shapes and color. So you'll often see the kind of circle, triangle, square, and the use of blue. I think it's blue, yellow, and red as the kind of primal forms of color, etc.
Yeah. So at harsh angles, lots of right angles. And this was actually the way he lived. This was the way he had these very, very small rented studios in Paris, which he would turn into sort of living paintings, as it were. So I think if you go down, we'll see a couple of examples. So this is a photograph of one of the originals.
I like the kind of ornamented stove in the center as like a juxtaposition to the rest of the room.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that came with the studio and he just couldn't get rid of it.
Just wasn't allowed to. That
maybe he did want to get rid of it. Yes. So I think this is the This is the reconstruction that they had. They took to it was a touring exhibition that was in Liverpool, and so you see his sort of use of diamonds, the diamond format of the painting up above the sofa. So that was basically just a square canvas that was turned on its point, as it were. So this is another one of his. I'm not sure. That may be the same studio again, but this is the reconstruction. Some of these buildings have now been demolished, so it's impossible to go back. So there's another view of a different studio, or no, sorry, that is the same studio. Yeah.
From the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, like you said, he's trying to turn the living space into a living work of art, because all the artists we've seen so far. I mean, maybe Sohn actually is the nearest to being someone that wanted to like manipulate the space with his ideas, but it's a very visceral way of doing it. I mean, you end up with quite an intense space. I would be constantly tripping over things because there's so many squares. I wouldn't know whether it's on the wall or the floor. I think it's a bit of an illusion.
He was. I think he was extremely OCD. I think he had a very, very strict sort of regime as far as sort of diet, and he was very sort of ascetic, as it were. And he had sort of quite very strict personal habits. I think he was a lifelong bachelor as well.
Interesting.
Whatever that means.
Is that
I know.
actually
I think
code,
actually a bachelor. That's not a euphemism. I think he actually he was never married. I don't think he had any affairs, except maybe when he was young.
Yeah, there's something definitely about that's been taken from this in the Memphis style as well, but obviously kind of turned up to 10, like the 80s Milanese. Don't you think? I don't know, just stylistic maybe. Okay, maybe not, but
well, I think you would know more about it than me. Yeah, so this I think this is a reproduction. Yeah, reconstruction. Sorry.
Very cool.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a look at someone else. Let's do another modernist, and I don't know if you're familiar with the architect / designer Alvar Aalto, who is a Finnish.
Yes, very well. I know there's a fantastic art gallery in is it Aalborg in northern Denmark. I think it's Aalborg. Yes, okay. I think yes, it is Aalborg. Yes, it's Aalborg, not Aarhus. It's Aalborg. So which is a terrific building, very large. Yes, highly recommend visiting it.
Okay, cool. Like Alvar's famous for his houses, but also for some of his design works, and specifically the use of bent plywood. Now, I think there's lots of debate whether another famous American couple and how inspired they were by his works. I don't know if you've heard much about that at all.
But, was that Eames, is it?
Yeah, the Eames.
Yes, there's big controversy about who got first. Yeah, came first.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of show you his space, so we can find the external first. I mean, if you were to look at it from the outside, okay, I forgot to get the external shot. It's this kind of like big white box in the middle of a Helsinki suburb. So you have to, again, travel quite far out of town to get to it. But he originally designed it as a joint architecture, like a space for his architectural practice, but also for him to live in. And it's kind of like a quite interesting. I mean, externally, it's very, very ugly. It's just literally like a big white cube. But internally, it's quite a nice office. This is the architecture space. I think it is still used today by practicing architects. And again, you can see this idea of the kind of the light pouring through, basically creating these kind of little booths and spaces for architects to collaborate on different projects, etc. Then if you kind of go downstairs into his private studio, this is one of his studio spaces. So you've got these kind of like large, mega large ceilings. You've got this kind of weird lamp mobile thing going on across here. And, some of his various chairs, and you can see this is all kind of bent plywood stuff that he worked on. This is kind of like the inspiration, I would say, for like 50% of IKEA's catalog. This kind of like big white open spaces with exposed wood furniture. This is definitely that kind of Scandinavian style.
Yeah.
It's all done in the 50s. If you step back a second, you can. This is actually an auditorium. So is that right? So basically,
Yeah.
you can there's rows of seats, and Alvar would do kind of talks and instructions to his other students and design team members on the steps outside. But I basically, I mean, you can see this was. I think this is a photo in the 80s, and they were pretty bad shape then. I don't think it was used. I mean, anyone who's been to Finland and seen how cold it is, you can see why no one wants to go outside. Basically, there you go. That's
Yes,
it
yeah.
from the other side. But I quite like the idea. They sort of created this kind of wrapping around courtyard kind of space. Oh yeah, this is the view from the other side. And then moving across to his interior, like this is the kind of living space, and there's the classic use of these kind of temporary walls, so you can slide this big space back and forth. Now, speaking of the style, I can't remember the guy's name. It's totally gone from me. There's a De Stijl house in Utrecht, I believe.
Is it Rietveld?
Rietveld house, yes, well done. And he sort of pioneered the idea of these kind of movable spaces and movable walls to
Modular living.
Exactly, yes, and it kind of lets you have like a nice open plan space and then close it off, for a time. But this is all the 1950s. I swear that if you go to any architect's house today, it basically looks like a variation of this. They basically haven't evolved since the 50s. One second. And then another kind of quite charming part of the house is its kitchen area. So again, like they had like a shared canteen for the staff, and I believe like an early version of like the modern kitchen. So in America, you've got these kind of very restrictive kitchen spaces that have been created, and Alvar designed all of these furniture units and created them by hand. You can access everything from both sides, so there's kind of like you can go around the side, do all of the cooking.
This is like an island then, island design.
It is kind of exactly, sort of get wrapped around, so you can prepare food and then receive it. So it's good if you're like a chef that's cooking for your 12 staff members, but if you want to just grab some stuff for your own breakfast or coffee, you can do as well. However, again, this is like the IKEA archetype that never ends. So there you go. You can see some of that stuff a little bit better. The classic use of pine and quote unquote modern materials at the time, pine and MDF and plywood, all of which are very old hat now, but get rolled out quite a lot. But
nice and cheap though.
Well, exactly, yes. But there you go, Alvar's house. I actually quite like it. It's one of my favourite modernist spaces, and he's actually a really cool dude. So you should check him out. Okay, I think we've got time for one last thing. I've put in 2 Willow Road. Do you want to do Goldfinger maybe?
You go ahead. You choose.
Yeah. Okay. We'll finish off with another cursed modernist. So obviously, in a Goldfinger, brutalist architect and I guess hated and loved figure, loved very much by the design and the architectural community, famous for doing Trellick Tower. If you ever go to kind of West London, you'll see this kind of quite large. I mean, it's a very novel building. Is all I'll say, but it's definitely.
I think AA actually noticed it and mentioned it in one of his streams.
He did. He took a photo of it, like driving by, and complaining about it.
Yeah, and then he discovered that it's a famous place and people know about it already. Yeah.
And of course, Goldfinger was so hated that Ian Fleming put him in his books as the one of the villains.
Yeah, didn't he? He went to. Did he went to school? No, it's Blofeld, isn't it? I'm getting it wrong, mixed up. Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, this is his house in Hampstead, number 2 Willow Road. Again, this is another property you can view, and I mean, take a look at the exterior, and you get to understand the man very well. But it's like a 2-story modernist building, large windows.
Is it 2-story? Looks like 3.
Yeah. 3-story.
Sorry.
And then it looks out to one of the parks around Hampstead. So again, if you know anything about Hampstead, it's quite like a posh area. Goldfinger was pretty well to do with all of his.
This should also point out that Hampstead is also I'll phrase this carefully. Is a particularly favoured area for European immigrants from the 1920s and 30s.
Oh, okay. I did not realise that.
Well, that's where Sigmund Freud.
Yes. I knew Freud was there. Interesting.
And his son Ernst Freud was an architect, I believe.
Okay, interesting.
Father of. No, it's okay. No, I mean the Freud family is a big family, so yeah.
But yeah, I've got a few photos of the interior. One thing I didn't mention on the previous rooms was the floor, the lino floor. So again, like a lot of the modernist architects and designers were obsessed with using like latest materials, and they kind of like, you know that there's the kind of the Whig view of history, that this idea that we're constantly progressing and technology is helping us progress. I think part of that mentality is baked into a lot of the modern design thinking, modern architect thinking, because they try and always use like the latest materials, even if they're not that great. Or, you know, I still don't know why you would replace a perfectly good parquet wood floor with this personally, but
lino has certain advantages, but I'm not sure I would necessarily replace parquet with lino. Lino is extremely good for obviously places where you have water splash, so kitchens and bathrooms particularly. Also, it's got antiseptic qualities as well. Interestingly, linseed, because it's made from linseed oil, and linseed oil has some natural antiseptic qualities.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, again, even though like the quality of lino is so much better in the 50s, if you see like what you get today, it's just this horrible plastic. I'm pretty sure it's because it's like not proper linoleum or whatever, it's PVC or whatever. So maybe that's part of the problem. We need to return to proper lino.
So you're the William Morris of lino.
Exactly. That's right. I'm going to bring back. I know lino has definitely had a bit of a comeback recently, anyway, but it's okay. I would always choose a parquet floor or a wooden floor over it. But yeah, this is his kind of like desk space and desk area, looking out. But you know, all relatively well managed and tidied. But apart from this kind of space across here, like it's definitely less kind of harsh and brutal than Corbusier's spaces. And you can see, like, again, I think this is in the 50s or 60s. He's created this, the kind of use of carpets, etc., like some nice little bits and bobs. Again, the kind of classic design furniture through the house. Again, if you see many like modernist, like modern architects who are like well awarded, the houses are just variations of these, basically.
I feel like I would fall off that. It looks like a sort of like a school, a school sort of stage. I'd fall off that.
I have a feeling that it's like there's a daybed in there, so you can sort of flip it down and have a snooze. And he would often sleep in his office. And again, you got this kind of the modular space with the wall that could be kind of folded, the classic folding wall. Which again was a huge fad that you'd see in the 50s, and you don't really see as much today. I guess that the bifold door is its modern representation. This is one of the living spaces. There goes. He's brought back the lino for that. Sorry, yeah, it's been a long day. Um, you've got the classic Anglepoise lamp there. Are you an Anglepoise fan at all?
Yes, I am. Yeah, classic ones. I like very much. Yeah, they're extremely useful for working with.
Yeah, they're pioneered with the spring system basically, which allowed you to kind of position it very well, and it's very good for point lighting, isn't it? So you kind of
Yeah.
it kind of came out of industrial. Um, Again, this is going to be perfect for architects where you need a light at a specific spot. But then again, the idea of bringing the industrial to the home ties into Corbusier's idea of the home being the machine for living,
And
etc.
also the Bauhaus, sort of adapting
Mm.
technology and manufacturing for domestic spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something futuristic. There's futurist about it as well, where again it's like we're putting machines at the front of our artistic movement, etc., etc. So, I couldn't find some amazing shots, but he was one of the pioneers of the dreaded cork floor, which again became hugely popular in the 70s. You would have kind of cork flooring, cork on the walls, cork obviously being the bark of the cork tree. It's a useful material, but I'm not too much of a fan of it. Are you?
Well, apparently Proust was a big fan, didn't he? Have it? He had his studio lined in cork, so he could.
No way.
Yeah,
I did
but
not know
because
that.
he was an absolute sort of neurasthenic, so he needed complete silence, and of course he lived in the centre of Paris, so he had his study lined in cork to damp the sound. Yeah.
Brilliant. And again, these kind of like cursed modernist kitchens. We're still living in this space. I find it just so interesting that how again there's just so much innovation and difference and different like forms of beauty in the 19th century, and then since the 1950s we've just been stuck in the same the same interiors as our modernist forefathers. So
Yeah.
And there you go. This is the last view from the side. But one thing I would say is that is very good at getting light in the spaces, and the modernists were because of their kind of raw focus on functionalism. You saw it in the Alto house. They're constantly obsessed with getting light into the
Yeah.
right place. While
And also the development of plate glass, which allowed large expanses of walls basically to be replaced by glass, which was developed by the Pilkington's development of plate glass.
interesting, yeah, and I guess you need the steel lintels and all of that kind of stuff as well to tie into that. But it's interesting because the Victorian space, or think about Soane's house, the only way you can do it is through like domes and skylights in individual rooms. I mean, you don't even have lighting that you can switch on, so everything has a kind of a naturally quite closed off and slightly suffocating space, while a lot of the modernist spaces are kind of more refreshing. But then I think there has been a kind of a kickback to a lot of the like people are wanting more of those Victorian spaces now. And again, one of the kind of big trends is the use of the snug. Uh, Creating a small space in your house to be cozy on a sofa, or to kind of relax, and there isn't all of this kind of light going through. So it's interesting that the wheel's turning again more towards the Victorian style.
Yeah, and obviously there was the great movement in the 1960s to start of the Conservation Society, essentially in Victorian Britain society, got founded in the 1960s as a result of basically the modernists destroying and demolishing large swathes of Victorian housing and public architecture. And so yes, obviously you see sort of the rise and fall of different movements.
Yeah, it's really worth checking out. There's the Birmingham back-to-backs, which is where they've sort of kept some of the Victorian slum dwelling. It's so fascinating going down there and seeing what it was like to live there, because I swear it is better than 90% of the apartments that are being created nowadays. Literally, I would genuinely rather live in a Victorian slum. I mean, the key thing it's missing was like functioning toilets, basically toilets in the house and
indoor
central
plumbing.
heatings.
Yes.
Yeah, but you could just retrofit that. I don't understand why I had to take down these buildings and replace them. But anyway, and another thought for another day. But should we leave it at that?
Mm-hmm.
And any kind of passing or last remarks on some of the buildings and spaces today?
Yeah, basically, it's this is a fascinating topic, and you do learn a bit about artists and architects from where they live, and that's not just by reading the contents of their letters and their diaries. You do actually see what their priorities are regarding space and light, privacy. You know, if they have a public room, if their studio is a sort of secret laboratory, or whether or not it's a sort of a social meeting place and so forth. It's quite revealing, and do check out basically all of our other streams, because you may indeed encounter discussion. I know when we're talking about the symbolists, for example, we mentioned a number of artist studios. So if you have a look back through some of our older streams, then you'll find us discussing artist studios and artist museums as well.
No, it's interesting. I mean, one thing I didn't comment on was, the alto space feels very collaborative. He's often thinking about the collective and different people. Corbusier is very introspective. It's about himself. It's about creating this little tiny robot bubble. Sohn is more kind of open and inviting. It's it's about the dinner. It's about the showing off. Having a room dedicated for paintings. You can tell, I think, a huge amount about people's personalities and the way that they would entertain other people and interact with other people, and their kind of their vision for the future. Someone like Watts. I need to find out whether he had a bigger vision for the artist colony, and whether he was trying to create a bit of a teaching studio there, because I know that today they have like a little teaching wing, so you can learn to do kind of some of the skills and art.
Yeah, they do. I think they do. In particular, they've got like a ceramics workshop that you can actually get your hands on some materials.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, we haven't decided what we'd like to do next time. I mean, I guess we'll have a chat about it after the stream. But in the meantime, is there anything that you would like to kind of shill or talk through that is coming up?
Oh, plenty. So subscribe to the Jackdaw at thejackdaw.co.uk. They're now accepting payments for the printed version through electronic means, so you don't have to write them a check or a money order anymore. Even if you ask your grandparents what those are. So I write for every issue. There's going to be a particularly spicy article written by me appearing in the next issue. So ask for the next issue if you're starting a subscription. Check out my piece on the Barbican, which is going to be mentioned in Bournebrook magazine. The review proper of that book may come out in a different outlet. I can't name it yet because it hasn't been accepted. If you want to see me in person, there will be two opportunities, or two opportunities to avoid seeing me, maybe. The first one is that I should be entering the Tate Britain. On the 10th of March, there is going to be a workshop on Hogarth taking place on the morning of Monday, the 10th of March, at Tate Britain in London, where I will be talking about art and politics, and most likely disagreeing with some of the other panelists. I don't know who those other panelists are, but I'm sure I will be disagreeing with them.
Oh, right. So you're literally going to be as part of one of the events there?
Yeah. I mean, they've actually. I'm not just going to be turning up on the day and heckling.
Sorry. You just said that.
Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. I've been invited to appear on a panel and to speak in public.
Excellent. This is huge.
I don't know if you have to pay extra to go to that, or if you just get it free when you go to the exhibition. So that's the Hogarth exhibition at Tate Britain, and I should be contributing to that. And
the fox will be in the hen house.
Yes, I should be ruffling a few feathers.
Will it be televised at all? Do you know?
I should imagine there'll be recording devices of some degree. I don't know if it's going to appear on sort of YouTube or something. Yes, interestingly enough, the Tate didn't actually invite me to this event. It was actually the organisers. So I'm not sure how the Tate feels about that. Me entering their sort of their home turf. If you want to see me speak at length on the vanguard in the arts, I should mention the Nomos event, which is happening in Birmingham on Saturday the 26th. Venue to be disclosed, but it's in Birmingham. So I will be speaking alongside, or on the same bill as, Panama Hat, our erstwhile colleague, and Sam Wickett of Bournebrook magazine. There will also be other speakers. So keep an eye open for that. You can still buy tickets, I believe. There are a few tickets left. If you go to Nomos Events, that's NOMOS events, all one word, .co.uk, and you'll have a chance to see me. I will be bringing some of my books, and I will be selling and signing those.
I was going to say, you can get, I'm sure everyone who's listening right now has already bought Alexander Adams' book. If you have not, buy one immediately right now, and then go and get it signed at one of these events.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And obviously just wait for Foundations of Aesthetics. I think it is going to be really useful and really interesting for a lot of people. So that will be.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. What's your ETA? I want to hold you to account.
Let's be cautious and say the first half of this year, but I think it's going to be well before the middle of this year. So
okay, very good.
First, let's say I'm aiming to have it out in the first quarter of this year. So before April.
Okay, I like it. We'll have to hold you to account.
Please. I've got to struggle through Kant. Please.
Just on my side, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe the video. We really appreciate it. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about the different streams and the stuff that we've covered. And people often make excellent recommendations. So,
and also thanks for the chat as well during the stream. We do keep an eye on it.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be talking at on AA stream tomorrow, the 3 times delayed Beyond Meat / Nudge Unit stream, and it'll be excellent. So please check that out on Academic Agents channel. But apart from that, I think that's it. Hopefully we'll have Panama next time, and I will just say good night.
Good night.